we live in what I consider to be a death-denying culture. We are very uncomfortable talking about death and loss. I actually put family members grieving from suicide and family members who have lost individuals to drug overdose in a similar classification. To me, I pair them, I put them together in a way. And that's what we call disenfranchised grief, because there's an element of that is actually qualitatively different than other losses. And those things that make suicide deaths and overdose deaths qualitatively different than other deaths actually complicate the grieving process for those people.
How so?
In a lot of different ways. So the first of which is stigma. Stigma surrounding suicide, stigma surrounding overdose deaths. When you think about it, we live in what I consider to be a death-denying culture. We are very uncomfortable talking about death and loss. Even under the most normal of circumstances, we think about it like this. From the time that you're born, you're assimilated and educated about lots of different things. You're prepared to participate in society through a process that we call socialization. By the time you're 7 years old, hopefully, you're working with the fork and you're good at that. You know your own address. You can write your name. You can write your name in cursive. You are learning math. You're learning how to tell time. But at what point does anybody teach us about death? Like, whose job is that? Who's going to come along and say, hey, you know what? At some point, we are all like the McRib, here for a limited time only, right?
When my son was 4, and my aunt, with whom I had a very close relationship, she was my favorite person that I've ever met, even to this day, on the earth, died. And my son had a close relationship with his aunt. And I was beside myself as to how I was going to tell my son that his aunt died. And I didn't know how to do it. And I went to a child therapist with my wife and sat down, and she taught me how to talk to him. And what she said is, what you tell the child is, sometimes when you get old, you get sick. And sometimes when you get sick, you die. But mommy and daddy are not old, and we're not sick, and we're not dying. And about 10 seconds after I told him that his aunt died, he went off and played with something. It was a non-event. I was going to fall apart had I not had that conversation with the therapist as to how the hell you do this.
So let me comment on what you had expressed.
Right.
We are never informed about death as a construct until we actually experience it. And that was what was different about your situation, was you had to educate because there was a loss. And now there's a responsibility to explain to him what is going on. And what was great about the advice that was given to you by the therapist was that it normalized the experience for the child to where he understood that this thing that I can't really wrap my mind around yet at this young age, that it's actually normal. And I can realize that people die, but I don't have to worry about it. And that's someone who will have a more healthy relationship with that idea, having had that exposure early on. But the reason he had that exposure was because it actually happened. Most of us bypass that because I think as a society, no one takes that responsibility. Parents don't want to take that on. They don't really train that in schools. I just don't know who in our society is responsible. It's more of an observation than a criticism. I just don't think there's anyone in our society that has the responsibility of teaching young people about mortality.